I really love productivity. And so this one, it's really hard for me because I really want to be excellent. I really want to be professional. I really want, like, that's my natural bent. I'm constantly needing to like reshape and realign what I'm trying to do in light of this because I can get carried away. Like, so if it takes like 8 hours, for example, to get something to 90% of perfect, 90% of what our ideal goal for a given task, a given situation, a given whatever it is, say it takes 8 hours to achieve that. It'll take 16 hours to get the next 10% of that, right? It takes way more time to get the last 10% of something than the first 90%. I would argue that a lot of times that's not the best use of our time. If it's 90% as good as it could be.
Can God be glorified?
Right. Like, is that enough?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
But so often, and if you talk to people in ministry, especially people who are full-time ministry, but especially like co-vocational, Bible, like all across the board, we live in that 10% a ton.
Yeah.
We can knock out, and I say 8 hours, that's a lot of time, right? So say it takes 1 hour to get something to 90%. It'll take another 4 to 5 hours to get that extra 10%. We live in that 4 to 5 hour extra 10% when maybe we would be better off using our time for other things. I'm reading a book right now called Forming Faith. It's actually about, I didn't realize this when I bought it. It's about kids ministry. Like, it's written by kids pastors to kids pastors. I'm not in kids ministry or a kids pastor
you do
at
have
all.
kids.
I do have kids. And that's what I thought I was getting, was a family discipleship book.
fair.
So technically you are in kids ministry.
We already talked about that. All right. We didn't talk about that. How many times do we have to say we already talked about that before it starts to get like shamelessly self-ding?
We're only on episode 7. Like,
right,
that's
like-
Yeah, we just talked about everything. in this.
We fixed it. 10
I'm learning.
episodes and we don't have
We're just
to
going
ever
to start
record
reading
again.
systematic theology.
That's why people stop at episode 10. We've already talked about everything.
Yeah, so I thought I was picking up like a family, like how to disciple your kids, because it's called Forming Faith, and the subtitle is literally like how to disciple the next generation to follow Jesus or something like that. So it's like, well, I have kids who are the next generation. I should learn how to disciple them towards Jesus. But then it's like, hey, since you're a kids pastor, I'm glad you got this book. Here's what, anyway. But I've been eating it up. It's really, really good. So highly recommend it if you're a parent or in ministry or both. But they polled kids workers, and I bet that this stat would follow through to pastors in different fields and different relationships. What they spend their time on, this is what the poll found. What they spend their time on throughout the week is nowhere near the same, like the level as what they view as important. I said that in a really confusing way. But so they asked them, like, what do you think the most important thing that you can do? What has the biggest kingdom and eternal impact about your job? And they, across the board, said mentoring and discipling parents and training them to disciple their children. So as a kids pastor, across the board, almost like unanimously said, that's the most important thing that I could possibly do as a kids pastor.
What do you do with your time?
5% of those respondents
Wow.
said that they spend the majority of their time doing that.
Wow.
Right. And that's kids pastor specific. I get it. I don't know that there's been a study that has done this across the board.
I bet.
But
Like,
being in ministry for 10 years,
I'm with you.
I would bet that follows through. The majority of the time, so that they spend their time on in this poll, is administrative tasks, communication, things that are important, things that are good things. Don't hear me say that menial tasks or administrative tasks are not important, because they are and they can be. But they spend the majority of their time, like 50 to 60% of their week, on those things, 5% of their time doing what actually matters from a kingdom impact perspective. I think that that's what we catch ourselves doing when we have this polished church idea where everything has to be perfect, everything has to be produced, everything has to be excellent, the big buzzword of the 2010s in the church, right? We end up spending way more time on that than what is actually eternally significant. Like, I get it. It's nice to have a nice building. It's nice to have walls that don't have paint chips like falling off, or doorknobs that aren't like, have that patina on them or whatever. It's cool. It's great. We want to have a building that looks nice, whatever. That's fine to an extent. But at the end of the day, it's not having uniform paint on the walls. It's going to lead people to the gospel and lead them into a lifelong pursuit of Christ. It's actually doing relational ministry and work in their lives that are going to do that.